listening to the Chapter a Day Bible Study. I'm John Stange, and today we're in Exodus 3, the burning bush. Exodus 3 is a turning point in the story of redemption. God steps into Moses' ordinary day, reveals his holy character, and sets in motion a plan that will rescue his people from slavery. At the same time, this chapter prepares us to recognize Jesus as the ultimate deliverer who comes in the very name of God. The chapter opens with Moses living far from the life he once knew. He's tending the flock of his father-in-law, leading sheep through the wilderness. This isn't where Moses expected to end up. He was once raised in Pharaoh's household, trained for leadership, and surrounded by power. Now, he's a shepherd in Midian. Yet this is where God meets him. Moses comes to Horeb, the mountain of God, and notices something unusual. Verse 2 says, "The angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush." The bush is burning, but it isn't consumed. God often interrupts our routines when we least expect it. Moses turns aside to look, and that decision matters. When he does, God calls out to him by name, "Moses, Moses." And Moses replies, "Here I am." That simple response becomes the doorway into a life-changing calling. God tells Moses to take off his sandals because he's standing on holy ground. This moment reminds us that God is near, but he's also holy. He invites relationship, but he's never ordinary. Then God identifies himself. He says in verse 6, "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." Moses hides his face, realizing he's in the presence of the faithful God who's been working across generations. God then explains why he's come. He says in verse 7, "I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt and have heard their cry." God sees suffering. He hears desperate prayers. He knows what his people are enduring, and he doesn't ignore it. He declares his plan to deliver Israel from slavery and bring them into a good land. Then God gives Moses his assignment. In verse 10 he says, "Come, I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt." Moses responds the way many of us would. He questions himself. He says, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh?" Moses is painfully aware of his past failures and his present limitations. God doesn't argue with Moses about his abilities. Instead, he offers a promise. He says, "But I will be with you." The success of the mission won't rest on Moses' strength, but on God's presence. Moses then asks another important question. When the people ask who sent him, what should he say? Well, God's answer reveals his name and his nature. In verse 14, we read, "God said to Moses, 'I am who I am.'" God identifies himself as the eternal, self-existent one. He isn't dependent on anyone. He isn't changing with circumstances. He simply is. It's interesting to read this in light of what we're told in the New Testament because this revelation points directly to Jesus. In the Gospel of John in particular, Jesus repeatedly uses the phrase "I am" to describe himself. He says, "I am the bread of life. I am the light of the world. And before Abraham was, I am." We see that in John chapter 8, verse 58. Jesus is intentionally connecting himself to the God who spoke from the burning bush. He isn't just a messenger from God. He's God in the flesh. Exodus 3 also points to Jesus through the pattern of deliverance. God sends Moses to confront Pharaoh and lead Israel out of bondage. Moses becomes a mediator who stands between a powerful ruler and an enslaved people. Well, Jesus fulfills this role in a far greater way. He confronts sin and death, he stands in our place, and he leads us into freedom that no earthly power can undo. There's also a powerful connection in God's promise to be present with his servant. God assures Moses, I will be with you. And later, Jesus tells his followers, I am with you always to the end of the age. We see that in Matthew chapter 28, verse 20. The presence of God that sustained Moses now dwells with believers through Christ. Exodus 3 reminds us that God reveals himself, that God calls ordinary people, and that God acts decisively to save. It shows us a holy God who draws near, and a faithful God who keeps his promises. But most of all, it prepares our hearts to recognize Jesus as the great I Am, the true deliverer, and the one who leads his people out of slavery and into life. Thanks again for listening to today's episode of the Chapter a Day Bible Study. For more resources to help you in your walk with Christ and your understanding of the Bible, please visit my website at BibleStudyHeadquarters.com. And if you'd like to partner with me by becoming a supporter of this ministry, you'll see a few options to do so, again, at BibleStudyHeadquarters.com or in the description of this episode. As always, thank you for your prayers, thank you for your support, and thank you for your willingness to share this content with others. Have a great day, and I'll see you again right here tomorrow.